Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 364 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located at my site, strengthcoachpodcast.com or continuefit.com. All right, on the strengthcoach.com and mbsc.tv Coach's Corner, which is really all we have today, guys. We got a short one. Just got a little extra time with Coach Boyle. We spoke about whether or not linear speed is enough to transfer to other qualities of athleticism and agility. This comes from a Twitter discussion. Let's not call it an argument, discussion about whether or not that was enough. So we expanded on that. And then we talked about kind of managing the multisport athlete. That was from an Instagram post as well. And then we just talked about really how do we manage it from the actual sports that we're playing to what we can do in the gym to kind of manage, let's say, overuse or doing too much. Guys, don't forget Perform Better. Huge summer sale still going on. Best prices of the year. So many items: dumbbells, bands, sandbags, plyo boxes, rowers, ski trainers, kettlebells, med bowls, ropes, and so much more. Check it all out at performbetter.com. The huge summer sale. All right. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, hey everybody, now it's time for the strengthcoach.com and mbsc.tv Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. You can try strengthcoach.com out for 7 days for free. Go to strengthcoach.com, get your 7-day free trial. Check out the forum, all the articles. I always post the podcasts on there. All good stuff. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ian. How are you?
All right. Hanging in. Just got back from a little mini vacation and, weather's nice here in the fall in Indianapolis. So I am going to New York in a couple weeks for a weekend to go see my Tedeschi trucks, baby.
I was just going to say Tedeschi trucks.
Yes. They're doing the garden parties. One at Boston Garden, one at Madison Square Garden. So I'm very excited. Nothing like seeing them in New York for me. Coach, I want to go over a couple of threads that I have questions about. Kyle Dobbs, Compound Performance, he said something, and I thought part of his argument was okay, yeah, we should be thinking about that. But then he kind of went in a different direction. I was like, ooh, he's not really making, that part didn't make sense. He said sprinting is a valuable skill, but are we applying it appropriately with our athletes? Might be a hot take, but sprint times for non-track athletes don't really matter, in my opinion. I'm looking at the ability to repeat high effort outputs, not decrease arbitrary times. But that confused me because if you're not timing, and you have all these kids or these athletes, how do you know if they're really giving that full effort? It's one of the things I love about looking at some kind of that data is that you always be like, well, look, hey, it's right there. The data's right there. You didn't. That wasn't 90% because he had started mentioning percentages. And well, I was like, how do you get percentages if you're not timing?
Right, exactly. And I think that was my sort of point of contention. And the disagreement sort of died out, and it gets into one of these things sometimes on Twitter. Well, this is what I meant to say. So if we look at what happened, first, he said, I never said speed wasn't important. He said, that's a narrative you're creating. And I repeated the quote. I said, the quote was, sprint times for non-sprint athletes aren't really important. And it's like, aren't really important, not important. I mean, maybe I'm winning the semantical Olympics, but those seem to be the same thing. And then the quote was, let me rephrase. I see more benefits to repeats at 85 to 90 than taking another 0.1 seconds off for most athletes. So I get what he's trying to say. What he's trying to say is, I'd like to have an athlete that can run 90% more often, which if we just looked at it in that simplistic way, I would say I agree with him. And what I proceeded to do was do the math for him. If you take another 10th off, then that 90% changes. So when you really start looking at this, and this is an argument that Tony Holler has made, that Ken Clark has made, that the reason you want to improve max speed is because, much like the reason if you're thinking about the 225 bench press test, obviously the guy that bench presses 400 has a much better chance of doing 225 for more reps than the guy who bench presses 300. That's no different in the sprinting. And that's so, what I had said to him was a guy who runs a 1.0 fly 10 runs 1.1 at 90 and 1.2 at 80. A guy that runs 1.2 runs 1.33 at 90 and 1.5 at 80. Those are massive differences. I wish I could pull up somebody's Instagram today, had the picture of the guys running the race. And I want to see if I'm going to actually scroll through and see if I can find it. But it basically showed the difference between, okay, here are two guys, and they're kind of starting behind the other guy, and they literally both pass him. And so I think it's a typical, in my mind, oversimplification. Yes, I understand what you mean in that I'd like a guy with really good repeat sprint ability. But that does not mean, in my mind, at least, that we're still not going to work to get faster. We've got to be looking at both of these things and saying, if I can get this guy faster, then the repeat sprint ability becomes better. Just because, as I said, what they need to do, that 80% number changes. And that's the really big thing that you have to look at when you're looking at this kind of particular situation. So it's like, I guess I get it, but I guess I don't think that I agree wholeheartedly.
Like, one thing I kind of liked where he was going at one point was, I'm saying, how often do athletes actually hit max speed or run straight lines in sport? All I'm saying is there are probably more lenses to look through than simply get faster, which I think you would agree with that. Like, for example, Tony Holler came in and it's almost sounded like, well, it didn't just sound like, he said the fastest athletes running in a straight line are best at acceleration, agility, and all other traits deemed athletic. But does that mean that we don't need to train in these other, like agility? I want to ask you that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, and the agility thing, I was just listening to a couple of podcasts on agility, and I think there's a lot of I guess, opinions about agility. When we look at agility and say, people always talk about it, and Tony Villani talks about it a lot on Twitter in terms of that what you really want now, and again, kind of expanding on Kyle's thought, what you really want actually is that guy who can change direction and change speed. And all of that is true. But I go back, I'm more of a Tony Holler guy in the sense that, and maybe it's just because I'm more simplistic. Tony talks about the idea that sort of a rising tide raises all boats. You know what I mean? And when you improve the max speed, everything else has at least the capacity to be better. So, because if we look, I'll give you a perfect example. We would generally think that a guy's 5.10.5 pro agility drill should be about 0.5 of a second less than whatever his 40 is. Meaning, if a guy can run a 4.5 40, he should be capable of running a 4.0 5.10.5. And the basic difference is that the guy who's going to run the fastest side to side or through direction change is also, at least in the simplistic way, the guy who can run 10 yards the fastest, right? Because he's got to run 5 to the right and then 10 and then back 5. If you're slow at the 10, you're clearly going to be slow at the direction change 10. And yes, there are mechanical things that you can do. Yes, there's anticipation. Yes, there's angles. There's all these things. But in the simplistic sense, the guy who can cover the most ground the fastest is logically going to be the guy who has the best. I won't say he has the best time at that drill, but he will have the best capacity to have that time at that drill. So, I mean, and I kind of let that one die a little bit because I thought I don't want to be here just taking all this time beating the dead horse or arguing with someone who stopped arguing with me. So I let it go. But I do think I guess there's a little bit of reality in both situations, but I will, at least at this stage of my career, I will go to my grave saying that what matters is that, when people say, oh, people don't run in straight lines, whatever it is, I don't care. Give me the fastest guy. Give me a guy who's getting faster. I think that guy's getting better. You can argue if you want, but I, for one, am not going to agree with you. You'd have to really establish some data points for me to make me believe that you were correct.
Mike, do you do anything like, for example, do you do any testing like with let's take Marky's group? You didn't do any 5-10-5s with them. Will you only do that with your combine guys?
Yeah, I only do that. I don't think, and this was one of the things that I wish I should have written down who I was listening to talk about agility yesterday. It was one of the Sportsmith, one of the Pacey performance podcasts. But I mean, I think all of that stuff, the thing that I don't like about any of those 5-10-5 direction change drills is I can teach you to get better at that drill, but I don't think I made you faster. And I can teach you how to do the drill better, how to eliminate steps, how to anticipate the changes and the break, and which foot to stop with and which foot to push with. And I don't know if, in my mind, I don't think any of that translates into a sporting setting. So, because you don't have that opportunity when you're out there with an opponent, you have none of those opportunities that I would be providing to you in that 5-10-5. So one of the things I really learned from all my combine stuff was that straight ahead speed really mattered. And I thought that was something that I was going to constantly work to improve. And that the direction change stuff really was, I mean, the best word I can come up with for that is artificial. And I don't even know if that's really the right word, but it's the type of situation where you look at it and you say, you're teaching somebody to perform a closed skill. Run 5 to your right, run 10 to your left, run 5 to your right. It's a very changeable drill without, in my mind, real changes in any physical quality.
Yeah.
I don't believe that in the 10. And I think that's really when we start looking at that, I think that's the biggest difference is that when we're talking about fly 10s, that's not the case. I can't teach you. I can't look at you and say, I'm going to show you how to run this better and you're going to run a lower time. That won't happen. But in the quote unquote agility drills, 5-10-5, L drill, that kind of stuff, I can teach you how to do that. And the better you get at doing what I told you, the lower your time will get. That
Like
will
what?
not be reflected in your 10, your 20, your 40.
Yeah.
Whatever.
What if you decide you could do your own experiment in terms of you could say, hey, next group that comes in, next young group, inexperienced group, we could do the 5-10-5 as part of their initial testing and never touch it again. Do 8 weeks of your training, sprint training, and see what the difference was at the end without any technique. Just don't even, hey,
Right.
this is what we're going to
No,
do.
you're
We're
right.
never doing this again.
That would be an interesting experiment. And I don't think people have done that enough in terms of actually looking. It
Yeah.
was perfect in terms of he showed, okay, it was like a one, I mean, it was actually by miles per hour. It was like, okay, these guys can run 21 miles per hour. This guy runs 19 miles per hour. And you literally watch them catch him and run by him because they can run 2 miles an hour faster. So I look at that and think it really matters. It does make a difference, that 1 mile per hour. So we spend a lot of time trying to get faster. And I go back, I mean, and maybe it's old, it's cliche, whatever, the whole speed kills thing. I mean, there's no question. And I don't care what guys can argue and bring up like well, what about Jerry Rice? Yes, there are going to be guys who were really successful in professional sport who maybe were not great straight ahead sprinters. I get that part. But what I'm going to tell you is that the vast majority of people who were really successful were good straight ahead sprinters. It is not the exception, but the rule that the fastest guys are the better guys. If we take two people of equal ability, that guy who can run faster is going to be better. If we just take, Tyreek Hill against some average speed guy, Tyreek Hill is going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's going to run by. He's going to get into space. If we look at strikers in soccer, there's always the 50-50. Every sport, right? Hockey has the loose puck, right? You got to get to the loose puck. Soccer has the 50-50 ball. There's football has separation. Like everybody has their term for your demonstration of speed. And fast guys are better than slow guys. I mean, there's just no way around it.
Mike, do you feel like, because a lot of times this is like your philosophy almost, like where your agility work is, you're working on strength, you're working on deceleration, you're working on plyometrics. All that is going to help agility. Is that kind of the direction that you've kind of gone, like, hey, we don't need to worry so much about the techniques for that, because we don't really hear you talk a lot about working specific agility for these court and field athletes?
Yes, exactly. I would liken it to the car analogy. Like I would look at it and say, if I wanted my car to brake and change direction better, I would give it better brakes and better tires. I wouldn't practice with the car braking and changing direction. Do you know what I mean? I'd
Yeah.
upgrade the components that allowed those things to happen. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's a little bit more of our philosophy in terms of we're constantly trying to upgrade the components. I need better single leg strength. I need better ability to decelerate in order to be able to create direction change. I think, excuse me, I think people randomly practice direction change. And I think that's what we found. I remember years ago, I would do that. And I can remember doing drills with the football players and putting cones out, star drill, run and touch this cone, run back and touch this cone, then go touch this cone. And I found myself the whole time just trying to coach them and say, okay, if you take 3 steps to the cone, if you plant with your left foot, boom, you're going to be able to get it off. You're going to be able to come back. You don't want to plant if you're going to your left. You don't want to plant with your right foot because you're going to be turned. And that's all artificial. I don't believe anybody is thinking about those things. And now you get into, so I get into stuff with my friend Jamie Monroe, who's a lacrosse guy, and you get into fakes and feints and head turns. And, there's all these other things that become a really huge part of sport that when you can then combine them with the athleticism piece, that's when you get the elite player. Because one of the things that he talks about with guys, they watch, like soccer actually counts head turns. How many times does a guy do this? Because what's he doing? He's constantly scanning the field. He's constantly analyzing and saying, okay, where are my guys? Where are the opponents? So when the ball does come to me and I want to redirect it, I know because I've been scanning, right? That's not even a direction change skill. That's a total mental visual skill that's going on, but it's so critical. There was a great, I send this stuff to Mark sometimes on Twitter. There was a great wide receiver break the other day where the guy just absolutely sold the inside move, with his head, with his arms, and went the other way. And the defensive back didn't even come close to covering him. And it wasn't really the cut, it was the sell. And like I said, my friend Jamie talks about that in lacrosse all the time. It's slowing down with the intention to speed up. One of the things I would always say to Mark in lacrosse is that if you're fast, what you really want to do is you want to go slow, because you want to get your guy going slow because he's going backwards. And then when you change speeds, he's got to now pivot and turn and try to match your speed. That's going to be really hard to do. But if you just made it into a race, like I'm going as fast as I can, you're going as fast as you can, then it's a matter of, can I win the race? Will I just get by this guy because I'm faster? Or do I bait this guy? And in the same way, Jamie would talk about, like, it's like in lacrosse, physical dodging. The exact opposite, run into him first and literally create the collision so that you disturb the system. Now this guy's got to figure out, what am I doing? Am I jamming? Am I backing up? So I think I get that there's a really big component, but I think people oversimplify it and kind of say, well, that's all that matters. And it doesn't. I mean, the difference is the ideal athlete, and we've had this conversation on the podcast before, is Larry Bird athletes, is Michael Jordan athletes, right? There's Michael Jordan, could dunk from the foul line. Larry Bird sometimes would lay the ball in as opposed to dunk it when he was 3 feet from the basket, right? I mean, they were both incredible NBA players, but with very different skill sets. I would say Bird's skill set was much more of a hand-eye and awareness type of skill set, where Jordan's skill set was much more of an athleticism-based skill set. My thing is that I want to get my Larry Birds as close to the Michael Jordan as I can get, because that's how I'm going to get that guy better. I'm going to have a much harder time if you give me the Michael Jordan, the Carl Crawford, the Jacoby Ellsbury, those guys, the really elite athletic 1%. It's going to be much harder to get them better. If you give me that guy who's a little maybe more gifted in terms of hand-eye, game awareness, that type of guy, I think I can make that guy better, because that guy, that 10th for that guy makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that reminded me of Coach Fullerton from Brown University. Remember Coach Fullerton, James Fullerton? I don't know
yep.
if you remember him. He used to always talk about change of pace, change of pace. It's like he would I went to hockey camp when I was a kid, every summer, he was always like, change of pace. And then he would show us a film, like, watch this change of pace, and
Right.
it was all about good stuff. There was a Dugout Confessions wrote something. Coaches, we have to stop preaching that multi-sport athletes are best while simultaneously making it impossible for them to play multiple sports because of required out of season work. Now, he's really talking about sport coaches, but I just wanted to talk to you about how do you handle this from the perspective of, okay, we're working with the lacrosse team, and we do want them to play multiple sports. Maybe they want to play baseball and it's in the summer, whatever. How do you manage that? Or, do you have, what are the rules for that? I mean, like, how do you do that while, working them out, trying to kick their butts, but they still need to play that other sport?
Well, it's funny. I just had a great conversation with a mom of an 8th grader about this the other day. One of the big things you do is you say no. That's the easiest thing to do, is when people try to corral you into these, hey, you got to specialize now. The good thing is, if you have a talented kid, you can say no. I did it with Michaela all the time. I when she was young, I told people she's not playing. People, can we have her for this summer tournament team? Nope, not playing summer tournaments. Not doing it. Didn't do it till she was 13. But at 13, I do think at some point it reverses, in the sense that you've got to look and think, okay, it might be 3 sports, 9, 10, 11, 12. It might be 2 sports, 13, 14. And then if you show some aptitude, it might be specialization at 15. That might be the route that you need to go if you really think you want to play in college, because that is the landscape now. The problem with the landscape is when that becomes the 8-year-old paradigm, when suddenly someone says, hey, we need to. And this is what, again, the Premier League guys are trying to do a better job of this, because they realize they're doing a terrible job, because they're taking academy kids in like 6 to 8 range and putting them into soccer academies. And then they're realizing, wow, the better athletes are coming out of these unstructured environments.
Yeah.
And our academy kids aren't necessarily achieving. So the academies end up becoming more sports academies in some of the better clubs, where the kids, they're actually having these soccer kids play multiple sports. So they develop better athleticism. So a big part of it is, and we've been banging this drum forever, but it's understanding that you want your kids to play multiple sports for as long as they can. The truth of the matter, and this is what's great, that you had Dom Starsier on, right? But in Dom Starsier's book, one of the things I loved about his book is he said, hey, if your kid's not the best athlete in his school, he probably can't play Division I lacrosse. And that was kind of his acid test. Like, if I'm going to see a kid play and all he plays is lacrosse and he's not the best athlete in the school, he's probably not a Division I kid.
Yeah.
If he was a Division I kid, he'd be playing forward on the basketball team. If he was a Division I kid, he'd be someplace else. Like, our kids that our Reading kids that all went on to play college, almost all of them were good multi-sport kids. Some with like Mark and his buddy Robbie were 3-sport kids as seniors. They made the golf team. They played golf, they played hockey, they played on the first 2 lines in hockey, and then they were the best players in the lacrosse team. Those are kids that are going to be college players because they're good enough to be recruited in one sport, but they're also good enough where they're still really solid contributors in other sports. But everybody gets freaked out because everybody gets the sales pitch is always the same, right? You're going to get left behind. The other kids are going to pass you by. You're not going to get seen. There's so much bullshit that the purveyors of the bullshit are really good at purveying that the parents buy into it. The parents buy into this. Oh my God, my kid may not get seen. And I always think that's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. When they're good, they're going to find them.
That's right. When they're good. And what happens is, and I always go back, I think I've told this story too, but years ago when I went to Germany to do a seminar, I ended up meeting up with this guy who had coached the Sedin brothers when they were growing up in Sweden. And he said, we were talking about this exact phenomenon, multisport. He said, yep. He said the Sedins had to choose between soccer, hockey, and netball because netball, apparently in Sweden, they can play professionally for money too. He said they were the best soccer players. They were the best hockey players. They were the best netball players. They had to figure out at 14, 15, which direction am I going financially? Because I could go in any one of these. And it's interesting because I'm going to do a swimming conference. And I think that's one of the reasons that we struggle in swimming because we weed all the athletes out.
Yeah.
6 workouts, double sessions, all these things. Kids that want to play other sports, they're not going into swimming. The only people that are going to go into swimming are just people who want to be swimmers. But I would look at it and think we might be getting some phenomenal swimmers if we got some better athletes in the pool and said, hey, yeah, you really only need to come to practice. It goes back to, we were talking about with swimming, it's the Tony Hall of feed the cats thing, right? What you really need to do with swimming is someone should adopt, a feed the cats type program where we say, okay, we're going to make these kids, they're only going to have to swim 2 or 3 days a week. And we're just going to swim sprints. And we're not going to make it miserable 2-hour practices.
So long.
Swimming, everybody's got shoulder problems. Everybody's hair is all bleached out. You know what I mean? It's just, I can remember when I was a swimmer, I can remember thinking, I don't want to be a swimmer. I don't want to hang around with swimmers. That is not the life that I want. So I stopped swimming. I stopped swimming because I didn't want the swimming lifestyle. And same thing. We force that on kids. We force kids into molds way too soon. And we do it for 100% self-interest as coaches.
Yeah. Mike, what about the strength coach? What about you as a strength coach saying, you need to balance that too? Because if it's the off season for lacrosse and that's their main sport, and you're going to train them, but meanwhile they're going to play another sport, and you don't want to kill them. And how do you balance that? What are your philosophy?
You're on an in-season program the whole time. The only time we do an off-season program is basically late summer after the lacrosse tournaments are done with.
Yeah.
Because for our guys, our guys were playing hockey and golf in the fall, and then they were playing hockey in the winter, and then they were playing lacrosse in the spring. And then up until their senior year, they were also playing 4 summer tournaments, usually last couple weeks of June, first couple weeks of July, and big recruiting tournaments where it really mattered that you played well. Those were the biggest tournaments of the year for a lacrosse player, were those summer tournaments that were coming off, after your high school season was over with your club team. And we just would be like, okay, 2 days a week. And that's why I always go back to like the Zach DeCant thing in terms of 2 days a week. And I had this conversation the other day with somebody, 2 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's 104 workouts a year. You do that through high school, you get 416 workouts in. I would not be surprised if Mark and his friends, if I said there were 416 workouts, I would bet they got close to 400. And when they're close to 400, you get a kid that at least in the weight room is pretty far along. Our guys, I would say they all went to college comfortably where they should be in terms of I can step right in the weight room and not feel physically inferior to somebody because I got those those 400 workouts done.
Did they get the 405? Did they get the
They did,
405?
yeah.
They
Yep.
did. Nice.
Yeah, I actually you missed it. It was on my Instagram.
Oh, I must have been on
Yeah.
vacation. Nice. Awesome. All right, Coach. I've taken enough of your time today. Thank you for doing this.
Oh,
Great
no,
topics.
no, me. I love
And
it. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's
I
easy.
know. It's awesome. All right, Coach. We will talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Ant.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 364 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Guys, the show notes are located at continuefit.com or strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, you can try strengthcoach.com out 7 days for free. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Guys, the huge summer sale right now, best prices of the year. So many items: dumbbells, bands, sandbags, plyo boxes, rowers, ski trainers, kettlebells, med balls, ropes, and so much more. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle for sharing his insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement, and for a little extra time today. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Next episode, I got on Matty Nickel. Going to be a great interview with him. My name's Anthony Renna. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.